Good evening and welcome to Face to Face. I'm Niresh Eliathambi. My guest tonight is attorney at law Tharaka Nanayakkara. Welcome, Tharaka.
Good evening. Thank you, Niresh, for having me.
Now, Tharaka, the process by which laws are made in a true democracy is sacred, isn't it?
Of course.
But in Sri Lanka, there seems to have been a deterioration in this process, and we see Parliament and members of Parliament bringing bills in a willy-nilly fashion without any or very little public consultation. We can name many such bills, and sometimes bills pop up out of nowhere, and sometimes bills which should have come many years earlier are delayed inexplicably. What do you have to say to this process being so weak right now?
Yes, Nilesh, I think it's a very pertinent question and a pertinent issue that you're raising today on Face to Face. Parliament exercises the sovereign lawmaking power of the people. According to the Constitution of Sri Lanka, it's the people who are sovereign. And since the entirety of the national electorate cannot come and make laws, you have representative democracy. And Parliament, elected for a period of 5 years, would represent that power of the people. And we have seen several laws being enacted over the years since the independence, several important laws being enacted by the Parliament. And as of late, particularly this tenure of Parliament has seen several moves to bring about laws or at least bills for collateral purposes, sometimes to suppress public opinion, such as the Rehabilitation Bill, Rehabilitation Authorities Bill, such as the Online Safety Bill, which the government managed to pass in the Parliament, but which gave rise to several questions, several issues. We can discuss that further later on into our conversation. And this is a very bad precedent, because as a nation we must understand what the need of the hour is. We are in an economic black hole, and yes, as legislators, as those exercising the legislative sovereignty of the people, the Parliament has a massive role to play. Parliament is also the supreme authority on public finance, constitutionally. But what are we seeing? Now, they brought in, for instance, the Rehabilitation Bill. Rehabilitation Bill was challenged, as you know, when a bill is placed in the order paper of the Parliament, within a period of, it used to be 7 days, now it's 14 days. Within that stipulated period, any person can invite the attention of the Supreme Court to determine whether a particular bill is constitutional or not, nothing else. Whether it conforms to the Constitution of Sri Lanka. So when parties filed special determination cases, I represented, I think, SM Marika MP for the SJB, and we pointed out several blanket provisions, several provisions targeted at suppressing people's basic fundamental rights, such as the freedom of expression, freedom of association, attempting to bring in provisions to forcibly rehabilitate civil activists, political leaders, and the Supreme Court more or less agreed in its entirety to our submissions and ruled that that particular bill, the Rehabilitation Authority Bill, several clauses were unconstitutional. And what did the government do? They abandoned it. Whose money? This is public funding. You draft a bill, there is an expense incurred. You place it in the order paper of the Parliament, you go through the process, and then you abandon it. This is public money. Then the Online Safety Bill, which they managed to make it into an act of parliament, but there are several questions as to
The process,
process
which was followed. Yes.
which was followed, because there was a special determination by the Supreme Court. Several recommendations were made, several clauses were found unconstitutional, and special majorities were required. But during the committee stage, certain amendments were brought which would not be submitted to judicial review, and within a day or two they had the final reading, passed it in Parliament in a questionable manner, and thereafter it becomes a law of the land. Upon the Speaker certifying the bill was passed into an act, it becomes a law, and ends the authority of the Supreme Court or the judicial system to review. Therefore, the government has set a very bad precedent, Nilesh, I would say. A, to suppress public opinion. B, to further government's collateral purposes and their private agendas, and also to also in a manner that is creating an utter waste of public funds.
Now, Tharaka, the way that the Supreme Court strikes down or finds fault with some of the clauses in these bills, it's almost laughable that such clauses are in these bills in the first place. So what's going on? Is it that whoever is drafting the bills simply has very little knowledge of the drafting of laws and what's in the Constitution right now? Or is it being done on purpose? Which is a question which has to be asked.
I think, Nilesh, it's the latter, because these bills are drafted generally by experienced legal draftsmen, and also generally when a matter of public importance is being drafted into a bill, the nod of the Attorney General's Department is obtained, and these clauses, as I pointed out earlier about the Rehabilitation Authority Bill. Then on the Online Safety Bill, if somebody, there was a clause where, if I think that was amended, but there was a clause where if someone uses a social media platform for, say, hate speech, it's very good that they are charged and dealt with, but they were going to make the social media platform liable. I mean, Sri Lanka is a very small market for Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or any other social media, or Google or Gmail or any other social media. So by doing that, the government ran a risk of chasing away this respected and widely used social media platforms. So such is the ignorance of those in power, and it's deplorable, I would say.
And many of these social media companies, their turnover is several times the GDP of Sri Lanka. So we seem to be picking fights with giant corporations when we are in the wrong, and they could simply walk away. They don't even have to reciprocate and have a fight with us. Exactly. They can just simply say, goodbye, Sri Lanka. But that's what I'm saying. It seems to be so ill thought out.
It's definitely, Nilesh, this is, I feel more than anything, this is intentional. These are driven by collateral purposes of the government, sometimes to satisfy certain associates of the government, sometimes when there is a risk of people rallying around against the government. Particularly now, what do we have today? We have a government who are very happily selling off public assets, government assets, not only the non-performing public entities, profitable public entities like say Electrogas, like Sri Lanka Telecom, in the likes of Lanka Hospital, the likes of Hilton Hotel. They are very happily divesting all these state-owned shares of these public assets as if they are divesting the ancestral property. So then when people, particularly trade union leaders, civil activists, concerned citizens, when they rally around protesting this, they want to crush these movements. So online safety, and we all know, starting from the famous Arab Spring, social media has been instrumental in putting together collectives of people without the traditional political leadership
That's
to
right.
challenge the status quo.
Yes.
And this government and the president and the authorities in power have been very much inclined to bring in laws to suppress the public will. This is in itself a violation of the fundamental rights of the people, because our constitution guarantees the freedom of speech, the freedom of thought, the freedom of association, the freedom of engaging in a profession or vocation of your preference, the freedom of practicing a religion of your preference. All these rights have been attempted by the government to be suppressed, and thankfully to our legal community and the opposition activists, several of these moves have been thwarted, have been defeated in court, but yet for all, ill will of the government is clearly manifested by these kind of legislative enactments, or at least bills in Parliament.
Now let's talk about something which the Minister of Justice said yesterday. He said that the government would shortly be bringing a bill on stolen assets recovery, which is something that the public has demanded for more than 2 years now, ever since, or about 2 years, ever since the last president was ousted. The public doesn't know much about the legal niceties of it, but what people wanted was for the stolen money to be recovered, brought back, so that the government would not be quite so bankrupt. But now, for nearly 2 years, we heard nothing on this, or almost nothing. And now the minister says that such a bill will soon be presented. So why the delay? Why wasn't it presented 18 months ago? What's going on? Is it such a low priority? If we didn't have that law, shouldn't we have brought one? And this is a government which brings laws within a week or two. The laws which acts and bills, they pop up out of the blue. But this particular one, which is stolen assets recovery, seems to have taken a very long time. And we still haven't seen it, by the way.
Yeah, Nilesh, I think you're perfectly correct, and I must say, as an attorney at law, stolen assets recovery in a legal form is a very complex process. But it has been done in the world previously. In Pakistan, Benazir Bhutto's alleged assets that have been ill-gotten assets have been recovered by the state. In Nigeria, the former president's assets have been recovered. There are several global examples, but this is not easy. In fact, a couple of years ago, we even drafted a white paper for the leader of the opposition, Honorable Sajid Premadasa, which has been one of the main aspects that he's always been dealing with, because everybody, it's very easy to say whatever the stolen assets we are going to recover and bring back, but it's not as easily done. But it is not impossible, but you have to have a strong legal framework. What happens is, when this government sees the public demand and public will to support such a move, for cheap popularity, they just make an announcement, okay, we are going to bring a stolen asset recovery bill. Now, Sri Lankan, I think Honorable Rajapaksa was also the Justice Minister between 2015 and 2018, if I am not mistaken, and the United Nations program and several other international movements had several devices to counter corruption and also to assist with stolen asset recovery. There was in fact a famous program called the STAR Initiative, Stolen Asset Recovery Initiative, and several officers of the Attorney General's Department, I wouldn't want to name names, but were sent to the United States, sent to other global training sessions, and they were trained on this, but nothing was forthcoming. But Now, at the very tail end of the government, when the opposition is saying that one of the first legislative enactments that we will bring when we are in power would be to bring a law for stolen asset recovery, to hijack that popularity, they want to bring this bill. It's fine. It doesn't matter where the credit goes or who takes the credit, so long as the job is done right. But what do you expect from a government and a president who is in cahoots with known rogues, well-known public fund misappropriators, so to speak, well-known corrupt politicians, corrupt families of politicians? How can you expect them to properly execute any stolen asset recovery procedures? People have lost faith in this government. What they have to do is to not to try and fool the people, because people are no longer the same laid back electorate we had. That was clearly manifested in 2022 in the Aragale, a president who was elected by a vast majority of 6.9 million votes was unceremoniously kicked out within a matter of a couple of months. And then the then Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, who was hailed as a king 10 years ago, was forced to resign, forced to hide in military camps for to be protected. So people have changed, the electorate has changed, and people cannot be fooled. So this government, we urge them to have the elections. They have delayed the local government elections indefinitely. Now the president can go for a parliamentary election if he wants. The constitution permits that after February 2023. He is not doing that. He had not called for the presidential election, which is technically constitutionally due before 17th of October 2024, matter of few months. If they have the mandate, they must demonstrate that they have the mandate. That is how decent democracies operate. So we implore upon the government, we urge the government to stop this kind of cheap popularity stunts and do and attend to the need of the hour.
Well, Tharaka, speaking of elections, we live in this strange democracy where those in power get to select which election will be held, which election will not be held, and when those elections are going to be held. So right now, we know that constitutionally, yes, there's a presidential election due, but we don't know the date. And we know that a general election is due next year, but that could even be held this year. So isn't this, to use cricketing parlance, isn't it like match fixing, where one side gets to fix not just the day, but everything about the match, the pitch, the umpires, perhaps. Well, maybe not the umpires.
Maybe not the umpires.
That's the voters. Hopefully, it's. But isn't it rather a strange way to have a democracy?
I think.
And shouldn't this require some thought and perhaps a constitutional amendment to give more sovereignty to the people rather than the president in power?
Definitely. Now, in fact, I was attending an address by the American ambassador just last evening, and what she was saying was, we know when our presidential election is held, we know when our Congress elections are held, we know when our Senate elections are held. So, but as Sri Lankans, we don't know. We only know that constitutionally President can dissolve the parliament after 23rd of February 2023. But until 2025, he can go on, unless a finance bill is defeated in parliament. And then presidential elections, we know it has to be held every 5 years, and 1 month prior to the previous elections, the election has to be held. So these parameters are there, but the government is being a government without any mandate to begin with. The mandate of the president is 134 votes of SLPP MPs who have totally lost their mandate since the people struggle, the Aragale. they were refused. They couldn't get onto the streets, they couldn't go to their villages, they couldn't go to their constituencies. So this government is a government without mandate, and we can't expect anything better from them. But one thing is for sure, this government nor the president cannot postpone the presidential elections. It has to be held. And when the elections are declared, people will decide, people will vote, and people will defeat this government without a mandate, this government which has put so much of pressure on people by way of tax and by way of oppression and by all unlawful means. So I think it's only a matter of time. Whether they like it or not, it will be an election before, there will be a presidential election before October, and people will speak and people will vote, and I would say justice would prevail.
Now, you spoke of the Tharaka layer, which is, to my mind, an unfinished revolution. A peaceful one, of course, which we are all very glad that it was peaceful, but it's an unfinished revolution. And the finish would be at the election, or two elections, the presidential and the parliamentary. Now, if the government changes, there are certain aspects, such as this stolen assets recovery, which the public would expect some action on. So, can we expect a future government to go for it, to perhaps engage the UN, the United Nations Star Program, which has been quite successful in recovering monies from other countries?
So as I mentioned, Niresh, already SJB, the political stream that we represent, has been presented with a white paper on stolen asset recovery, which contains several aspects: identification of the assets, establishing the legal connections with the assets, coordination with local authorities, and establishment of a particular institution to manage the stolen assets until they are recovered and added back to the economy. A very, very informative white paper have been drafted, and the leader of the opposition, Mr. Sajid Premdas, has made it a point to stress upon the fact that this will be one of the first enactments. The stolen asset recovery would be one of the first enactments that would be brought under SJB government. So we still have hope, because we are here, we are supporting that team that which can actually bring about some change to Sri Lanka. And I believe if we are given the opportunity, which I see the good signs of getting, definitely this would be one of the first legislative moves of a future government.
Now, if the SJB comes into office, can we expect Parliament to behave in a more rational fashion, where the drafting and passing of laws is concerned? This willy-nilly popping up of bills and rushing them through with hardly any public discussion, can we expect that to stop and to go back to a semblance of sanity where lawmaking is concerned?
Most certainly, Nilesh, I firmly believe that in a future SJB government and a future SJB executive, the legislative priorities would be correctly understood, and any legal measures that are brought in, maybe an act of parliament, maybe a regulation, anything for that matter, any legal step for that matter, would be for the betterment of the country and protection of the rights of the people and the interests of the people, and not to protect the interests of a minority of politicians or corrupt entities. Therefore, I firmly believe that legislative priorities would be very clearly identified and acted upon.
And I'm afraid that's all the time we have tonight. My thanks to Tharaka Nanayakkara, attorney at law, for all his wise words tonight. We certainly learned a lot. Thank you very much for watching. Good night.